Hello everyone, what is up? It is me, AlbyMTG, and for today's Magic the Gathering video, we're going to be talking about the Banned and Restricted update, which came out today, July 2nd, 2018. The only changes that we had were for the Legacy format, and that is Deathrite Shaman and Gitaxian Probe are now banned. Again, there was nothing else really changing. They talked a little bit about Standard here in the article, and they included a nice little statistic, which I think is really cool, that we'll talk about here in just a second. But essentially, they just said that the Standard metagame seems fine right now. The way that people are adjusting to the meta and then slowly changing up their decks. There's been a few decent decks throughout the course of this Standard season. We're looking at things like Grixis Energy, white-blue control variants, white-black vehicles, black-red decks, and the mono-red decks. So Wizards of the Coast thinks that Standard is working very nicely right now and just slowly slowly managing to adjust itself without the need of a ban to help with the adjustment. And then they included this nice little statistic here featuring the archetypes. This is all data collected from Magic the Gathering Online, and it features the archetype based off of what an AI or a bot went ahead and classified each of the decks playing as, and then it included their non-mirror win percentage, and the highest non-mirror win percentage that we had here was actually the mono-green Stompy list, which is a deck that a lot of people aren't super high on right now. A lot of people really enjoy the black-red aggro decks, the mono-red aggro decks, and the white-blue control decks at this current point in the meta. So it is kind of neat to see that the best deck in terms of non-mirror win percentage based solely off of Magic the Gathering Online is actually the mono-green Stompy list, which splashes black for a few sideboard cards like Hour of Glory, Vraska, and then occasionally Duress as well. So I think that this is pretty sweet, a pretty sweet little graphic here. Aside from that, they just kind of talked about Goblin Chain Whirl a little bit, some of the other powerful cards in the mono-red decks. And aside from that, that was basically it in terms of Standard, Modern, Pauper, and Vintage. They didn't really talk much about. They just said they were going to continue to monitor those. A lot of people were expecting Stoneforge Mystic to get unbanned today in Modern, as well as possibly seeing Ancient Stirrings getting banned in Modern. But they chose not to change up anything, which I think is a reasonable idea. I think I agree with that one. I think Stoneforge could possibly be unbanned, and I wouldn't be overly upset about it. But Modern right now is just a very fun format to play right now. There are a lot of fantastic decks in Modern, and I think it's in a fantastic place. Same goes for Vintage and Pauper, even though I don't play those quite as often as I do Modern. But again, the big change today being Deathrite Shaman and Gitaxian Probe being banned from Legacy. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead here onto mtggoldfish.com, and we're going to take a look at some of the Legacy decks that ran Gitaxian Probe and that ran Deathrite Shaman, and we're going to go ahead and take a look at how this banning might shake up the meta a little bit, how it might affect deck building choices and those kind of things. So the deck that took the biggest hit here was easily Grixis Delver. Grixis Delver being the top deck in terms of meta percentage, 11.24% of the meta. And you can see it ran 4 copies of Deathrite Shaman here, and you can see that it ran 4 copies of Gitaxian Probe here as well. So this deck is losing 8 of its 75 cards. So those are going to require adjustments to be made to the decks. I think the biggest adjustment that will be made, in my opinion, is going to be with the mana base. I think that's where you're going to see the biggest change. Because right now only running 18 lands, 4 of them being Wasteland. And again, your opponents in Legacy, 90% of them are all running Wasteland as well. So you really don't have a ton of lands that actually produce mana. In this list specifically, there's 1 Tropical Island, 3 Underground Sea, and 3 Volcanic Island in terms of lands that can actually produce mana. I guess Wasteland can produce mana too, but so in terms of producing colored mana, we're only looking at 7 different lands that are able to do that. And so I think what you're going to end up seeing is that now with Deathrite Shaman gone, Deathrite Shaman used to be another way of producing mana of any color, and so it used to be able to do that, and then Gitaxian Probe allowed you to keep those 1 land hands, and then eventually just get there by digging through your deck by an additional card. So I think that the biggest change you're going to see here is that these decks will probably increase their land count up to about 20 lands, and so over the long term, like over the course of say a 15-round tournament, 16-round tournament, something like that, this is going to cause more flooding, but it's going to cost less mana screw, so it does kind of even out over the terms of a longer tournament. But it wouldn't surprise me if people again increase their land counts up to 20 lands. I think what you're going to see is that a lot of people, once they first try to once they first try to run these decks after the bannings, they're just going to replace Deathrite Shaman with another 4 of, and they'll replace Gitaxian Probe with another 4 of. And you're going to see them trying the 18 lands again, and I just don't think that that's going to work. I think you're going to need to see the increase up to about 20 lands, and I think that that'll help the deck significantly, even though it's losing 2 extremely powerful cards from it. And so what really makes Deathrite Shaman strong, I guess we should probably have talked about that a little bit earlier on, is that Deathrite Shaman acts as both a win condition and a mana accelerant, as well as just being a hate card in other matchups too. This card does exactly what you want it to do in basically every single matchup. So it has the ability to just be a 1/1 or a 1/2 for 1, which allows you to exile target land card from a graveyard and add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. So again, this helps with mana acceleration and also removes a land card from either your bin or an opponent's bin. And there are a lot of lands hitting the graveyard. What a lot of people don't realize if they're kind of new to Legacy is that there are a ton of lands that hit the graveyard. When we talk about the fetch lands, that's a land hitting your graveyard, and this list here is running 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different fetch lands as well. So again, that's 7 lands that'll be hitting the graveyard as fuel for your Deathrite Shaman, and then a card like Wasteland puts 2 lands into the graveyard because you're sacrificing the Wasteland, which means it goes to the graveyard, and you're destroying a non-basic land of your opponent's, which means that's going to the graveyard, and Deathrite Shaman can hit either of those. So it's very good in terms of producing mana as a mana accelerant, and then in the late game, exile target instant or sorcery from a graveyard, and then each opponent loses 2 life, so it acts as a slow win condition, kind of the death by 1,000 cuts sort of win style, where just slowly over the course of a game, like, it may seem kind of awkward to say over 10 turns that this card can just kill you, but when you go ahead and add in additional damage being taken from things like Gitaxian Probe, or maybe even Dismember if you're running a Dismember, basically any Phyrexian mana card, and then the damage you're taking from using your fetch lands, just all sorts of just random damage that you might be taking throughout the course of a game. In order for you to use Force of Will, you have to pay a life in order to do that as well. So slowly but surely, the damage will rack up, and Deathrite Shaman is a way for you to end the game. And then finally, exile target creature card from a graveyard. You gain 2 life, gives you some additional staying power if your opponent's on the death by 1,000 cuts kind of duel with you, where you both have Deathrite Shamans out. This is a way for you to gain back some of that life so that it's harder for them to kill you. Meanwhile, if you're also just playing against, for example, Dredge, then this is a nice way, or just like Reanimator as well, this is a way for you to remove the creature card that they're trying to dredge back or that they're trying to reanimate using this Deathrite Shaman. So it's a nice little hate card against those matchups as well. So the card just basically does everything. And then Gitaxian Probe, which is right here. Just look at target player's hand, draw a card. It's basically pay 2 life to play with 1 less card in your deck, essentially. That's basically all Gitaxian Probe is, and in the matchups where that matters, it can be fantastic just having the additional card, and then it's like a free spell for cards like your Young Pyromancer. It also just, again, we just talked about Deathrite Shaman, it puts the instant or sorcery card in there so that later on you can go ahead and do 2 damage to your opponent. For your Gurmag Angler, it's additional free fuel for your Gurmag Angler, and then for Delver of Secrets, it flips your Delver of Secrets if it's on top. So the card just works perfectly in this list specifically, so I think this list is by far the deck that's going to be taking the biggest hit. When we look at 4-color Leovold, the only card that's really taking a hit from is the Deathrite Shaman, but again, the Deathrite Shaman was super important in this list as well, because 4-color Leovold, again, being a 4-color deck, it was really important that the Deathrite Shaman being able to produce 1 mana of any color definitely helped with the kind of bold move to run 4 colors instead of just slowing it down to run something like 2 or 3 colors. And then the other deck that takes a big hit here is Ad Nauseam Tendrils, also known as Storm, as most people would call it. And again, the only card it's losing here is Gitaxian Probe, but Gitaxian Probe was super strong in this deck. It basically is a free spell. You pay 2 life to up your Storm count by 1, and you also get to draw a card so it can replace itself. This card can be fantastic. And then because you're running cards like Cabal Therapy says name a non-land card, target player reveals his or her hand and discards all cards with that name. By running a card like Gitaxian Probe, you get to take a look at their hand, and so then from getting to take a look at their hand, you can then name the proper card with your Cabal Ritual, meaning that you can take away, if you see that they have something that really stops your deck, you can go ahead and take that away. If you see that their plan is, or if they're like light on creatures or light on something, like maybe you're playing against Death and Taxes, for example, and they kept a 1-land hand with an Aether Vial, you can go ahead and turn one Gitaxian Probe into Cabal Therapy, naming their Aether Vial. Once you see that they kept a sketchy hand that relied on Aether Vial a lot, you can go ahead and take that away from them, and then you can kind of sculpt your hand around that. Or if you see that they have Thalia, Thalia is a fantastic card against Storm as well. You can go ahead and take that with your Cabal Therapy. Just led to a lot of fantastic uses here in this Storm deck. And so seeing it go from here is going to be a fairly big hit. I think that you might see Cabal Therapy drop down a few in number, maybe drop down to 1 or 2 Cabal Therapy instead of the third. And then, of course, having additional free spells was just perfect for this deck. So maybe you'll see like Noxious Revival get a chance, but I'm not even 100% sure about that. It would be very interesting to see. Caleb Shear is a Magic the Gathering pro who focuses on the Storm archetype. He plays a lot of the Storm decks, and so I'd be very interested to see his first list after these bans go into effect, which again, these bans go into effect here on July 6th if you're playing in paper, and July 5th if you're playing on Magic the Gathering Online, and then the next BNR announcement is on August 20th, 2018, which is about 1 month and 18 days from now. So we have a little bit of time before we have to worry about any of these other cards, and by then M19 will be out, and we'll be able to see if that shakes up Standard a little bit, if that shakes up Modern a little bit. There's some additional like hate cards getting printed for Eternal format, so maybe those will help a little bit too. But aside from that, it was basically just a big hit on the Gitaxian Probe and the Deathrite Shaman were just kind of big hits on some of the top tier decks in this format. You can see Grixis Delver, 4-color Leovold, and Ad Nauseam Tendrils essentially make up 25% of the meta just with those 3 decks, maybe a little bit over 25% of the meta here if I'm doing my math correctly. And so getting rid of important cards from all of those decks will probably help Miracles go up a little bit, because Miracles actually doesn't even play Gitaxian Probe, so Miracles didn't take any hits from this. Elves got a little bit of a hit losing Deathrite Shaman, but Elves still has its core concept together, which is very nice. You might see Reanimator seeing a little bit more popularity now that Deathrite Shaman isn't there as a main board answer for your reanimation target. There's a lot of just different archetypes that you could see increase a little bit more now that these 2 cards are banned. And so yeah, I'm very interested to see what happens in the next Legacy tournament that takes place after this ban and restricted announcement. I think it's very, very cool, Legacy as a format. Basically, the way Legacy works right now is it's kind of, when you think about the rock paper scissors formats, Legacy is kind of the same way. The 3 big boogeymen are essentially Grixis Delver, Storm, and lands. The only thing keeping lands really out of it is the price point. Having to buy some of the very expensive lands can be a pain for this deck. For example, the Tabernacle at Pendrell Vale is a land card that you see in this deck, and that costs $2,500 just for that one card. So there's not many people playing lands, but those that do play lands end up with a very fantastic strategy. That's the only reason why lands isn't quite as high in terms of meta percentage, I should say. And so essentially, when you think about the rock paper scissors format, it's Grixis Delver beats Storm, Storm beats lands, lands beats Grixis Delver. The only problem is that Grixis Delver has the best chance to steal games from the Storm and the lands matchups. For example, Storm versus lands is basically 90% Storm will win, 10% lands will win, maybe even 95% Storm versus 5% lands. But then when we look at like lands versus Grixis Delver, it's more like lands will win 70% of the time, Grixis Delver will win 30% of the time, and then Grixis Delver versus Storm, you're looking at something like probably not 90, closer to like 80% Grixis Delver, 20% Storm, I would say. So it's much easier for Grixis Delver to steal games from its bad matchup, and then Grixis Delver just has play against basically all of the rest of the field, has good play against Miracles, good play against Elves, good play against Death and Taxes, Reanimator, all these other strategies. And so right now Grixis Delver just clearly was the best deck in the format, in my opinion, but this blow of losing Deathrite Shaman could be very important for how Legacy will end up shaping up in the future. I'm very interested to see what will happen. Let me know down below in the comments what you guys think will happen, and I will see you guys here tomorrow for yet another Magic the Gathering video.